The late June sun beat down mercilessly on the neighborhood as Emma Richardson stood on her newly finished back patio, surveying the sparkling blue water of her pool with a sense of pride and satisfaction. After 3 years of saving, planning, and construction delays, her backyard oasis was finally complete, a beautiful in-ground pool surrounded by tasteful landscaping and a modest patio area. For Emma, a hardworking physical therapist who rarely took vacations, this pool represented more than just a luxury. It was her retreat, her sanctuary after long days helping patients recover from injuries. At 38, Emma had purchased the modest 3-bedroom home in Sycamore Hills 5 years ago. The neighborhood wasn't the most upscale in town, but it was well-maintained, quiet, and had reasonable HOA fees. Most importantly, it had been one of the few neighborhoods where she could afford to buy a home with a yard large enough for her dream pool. She had specifically checked the HOA bylaws before purchasing to ensure pools were permitted, and she followed every rule and regulation during the 8-month construction process. "It's perfect," she whispered to herself, dipping her toe into the cool water. After working 12-hour shifts all week, she was looking forward to her first full weekend of relaxation by her new pool. The sharp, staccato click of heels on concrete interrupted her moment of tranquility. Emma turned to see Diane Holloway, the Sycamore Hills HOA president, stride purposefully across her lawn toward the patio gate. Even in the sweltering heat, Diane was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit, her silver blonde hair swept into a tight bun, her face set in its perpetual expression of disapproval. "Good morning, Diane," Emma called, trying to keep her voice pleasant despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. In the 5 years she lived in Sycamore Hills, Emma had learned that unannounced visits from Diane rarely brought good news. "Emma." Diane's voice was cool as she let herself through the gate without waiting for an invitation. "I see the pool is finally finished." "Yes, just yesterday. I was about to enjoy my first swim." Diane circled the pool slowly, running a manicured finger along the edge of a patio chair, inspecting it for dust. "It's larger than the plans indicated." Emma frowned. "No, it's exactly to specification. The HOA approved all the plans." Diane stopped her circuit and faced Emma directly. "Well, I'm here to discuss the pool schedule." "Pool schedule?" Emma repeated, confusion evident in her voice. "Yes. As you know, Sycamore Hills doesn't have a community pool. The board has decided that since you now have this," she gestured vaguely at the water facility, "it should be made available to the community." Emma stared at Diane, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "This is my private pool on my private property." Diane smiled, didn't reach her eyes. "The HOA has determined that all significant amenities should benefit the entire community. We'll be sending out a schedule next week. Residents will have access Tuesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. You can have private use on Mondays and after hours, of course." Blood rushed to Emma's face as anger and disbelief battled for dominance. That's absurd. There's nothing in the bylaws about this. You can't just decide my private property is now community property." "Actually, we can." Diane extracted a folder from her designer handbag and handed it to Emma. Section 8, paragraph 12 of the bylaws gives the board discretion to establish community use guidelines for visible amenities. The vote was unanimous. Emma's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside was a neatly typed document titled Community Pool Usage Guidelines. As she scanned the pages, her disbelief turned to fury. Not only had the board scheduled almost all daylight hours for community use, but they also expected her to maintain the pool, provide basic supplies like sunscreen and towels, and keep a first aid kit stocked. "This is outrageous," Emma said, her voice low and controlled despite her anger. "I paid for this pool with my own money. I'm responsible for its upkeep and insurance, and you expect me to just hand it over to the entire neighborhood?" Diane's expression hardened. "The decision has been made, Emma. We expect you to comply by next weekend. The community is quite excited about the new pool." As Diane turned to leave, she paused and added with a smirk, "Oh, and we'll need a key to the gate by Tuesday. Can't have the pool accessible only when you're home." Emma stood frozen, the absurd document clutched in her hands as Diane clicked her way back across the lawn. One thought crystallized in her mind. This woman had just made a very, very big mistake. Emma spent the remainder of her Saturday in a state of stunned disbelief, the community pool guidelines sitting on her kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. She'd read and reread the document, searching for some loophole or misunderstanding, but Diane's intentions were crystal clear. The HOA intended to commandeer her private pool for community use. Sunday morning, Emma woke early and did something she'd never done before. She skipped her usual morning run and instead pulled out every document related to her home purchase and the HOA bylaws. As a methodical person by nature, Emma had kept meticulous records, and she soon had stacks of papers spread across her dining room table. She found Section 8, paragraph 12 of the bylaws that Diane had referenced. It did indeed mention community use guidelines for visible amenities, but in the context of front yard decorations and landscaping, nothing that could possibly be interpreted to include private backyard pools. This is complete nonsense, Emma muttered, reaching for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Mark Jeffries, a neighbor who had helped her with some plumbing issues last winter. Mark had lived in Sycamore Hills for over 15 years and had once mentioned serving on the HOA board before Diane took over. "Diane's doing what?" Mark exclaimed after Emma explained the situation. His voice came through the speakerphone filled with indignation. "That's absurd. There's absolutely nothing in the bylaws that would allow that. She claims Section 8, Paragraph 12 gives the board the authority. It doesn't. That section is about front yard holiday decorations and lawn ornaments. She's completely twisting it." Mark paused, then added, "You know, you're not the first person Diane has tried to bully. She's gotten worse since her husband left her last year." By Monday afternoon, Emma had spoken with 6 more neighbors, all of whom expressed shock at Diane's demands. What emerged was a pattern of increasingly controlling behavior from the HOA president, who seemed to view the neighborhood as her personal fiefdom. One neighbor mentioned that Diane had tried to force him to allow the garden club to use his greenhouse. Another revealed that Diane had attempted to claim a portion of her driveway for visitor parking. "She's getting more brazen," said Eleanor, who lived across the street. "Last month, she tried to tell the Millers they had to let her use their home theater for board meetings because it was wasteful for just one family to have such a nice setup." Emma spent her lunch break on Monday researching property laws and HOA regulations. By the end of the day, she had consulted with a real estate attorney who specialized in homeowner association disputes. The consultation cost her $300, but the attorney's advice was worth every penny. "Ms. Richardson, this is a clear overreach of authority," the attorney, Rachel Chen, told her firmly. "The HOA has no legal right to claim your private pool as community property. The bylaw they're citing doesn't apply, and even if it did, it would likely be unenforceable as it would constitute an uncompensated taking of private property." "So what do I do?" Emma asked, relieved but still anxious. "Diane expects a key to my gate by tomorrow." "Don't give her anything," Rachel advised. "I'll draft a cease and desist letter immediately. In the meantime, document everything. If Diane or any board members come to your property, record the conversation if possible and ask them to leave. If they refuse, call the police and report them for trespassing." Tuesday evening, Emma arrived home from work to find a small group gathered at the end of her driveway. Diane stood at the center, surrounded by 3 other women whom Emma recognized as fellow board members and Diane's closest allies in the neighborhood. They were all wearing swimsuits under their cover-ups, and one was carrying a stack of towels. Emma's heart raced as she parked her car and stepped out, the cease and desist letter from Rachel tucked safely in her purse. She had been prepared for confrontation, but not quite so soon. "Good evening, Emma," Diane called, her voice falsely cheerful. "We thought we'd inaugurate the community pool hours. Did you forget to drop off the gate key?" Emma took a deep breath and walked toward the group, keeping her voice steady and professional, the same tone she used with difficult patients at work. "Diane, there's been a misunderstanding. My pool is not and will not be available for community use. It's private property." Diane's smile faltered, then hardened into a thin line. "We've been through this. The board has made its decision." "Your decision is not legally enforceable," Emma replied, pulling the letter from her purse. "This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. The HOA has no authority to claim my pool as community property. Section 8, Paragraph 12 refers to front yard decorations, not." The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. Bleary-eyed, she reached for it and sought a stream of text notifications from neighbors. Her heart sank as she read the first message from Mark. "Check your email. Emergency HOA meeting called for tonight. Diane's on the warpath." Sure enough, an email from the Sycamore Hills HOA board sat in her inbox, the subject line reading, "Emergency Meeting. ATNDANC Mandatory." The message announced a special session to discuss community amenities and legal threats against the board, scheduled for 7 p.m. that evening at the small community center. Attendance was required for all homeowners, with a thinly veiled threat that absence will be considered tacit agreement with board decisions. Emma's phone rang. It was her attorney, Rachel. "I just received a rather hostile email from Diane Holloway," Rachel said without preamble. "She's claiming our cease and desist letter constitutes harassment and threatening to pursue legal action against both of us." Emma groaned. "She's called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. Apparently, I'm making legal threats." "This is actually good news," Rachel replied, surprising Emma. "It means she's rattled. Empty threats are the last resort of someone who knows they're in the wrong. What should I do about the meeting?" "Go. Be calm, be prepared, and let me know immediately if they try to take any formal action. Oh, and Emma, record everything. Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state for audio recordings, so have announced that you're recording at the beginning, but video recording in a public meeting is perfectly legal. Throughout the workday, Emma received texts from neighbors expressing everything from support to confusion. By 6:45 p.m., as she arrived at the community center, it was clear this would be no ordinary HOA meeting. The small parking lot was completely full and residents were streaming toward the building from all directions. Inside, the usually half-empty room was packed. Emma spotted Mark, who waved her over to where he had saved her a seat near the front. "Quite the turnout," he murmured as she sat down. "I haven't seen this many people at a meeting in years." Emma noticed Jennifer, the board member who had seemed uncomfortable during yesterday's confrontation, sitting at the board table looking distinctly unhappy. Diane was nowhere to be seen yet. At precisely 7 p.m., Diane swept into the room through a side door, flanked by the other board members. She took her seat at the center of the table and surveyed the crowd with evident surprise, clearly not expecting such attendance. "I call this emergency meeting to order," she announced, banging a small gavel. "We have serious matters to discuss regarding community amenities and the disturbing precedent of homeowners using legal intimidation against this board." Emma stood up before Diane could continue. "Point of order," she said clearly. "I'd like to announce that I will be recording this meeting for my records." She held up her phone visibly. "Also, I believe proper procedure requires that minutes be taken and that the agenda be approved by those present." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Diane's mouth tightened as she nodded curtly to the board secretary to begin taking minutes. "The agenda has already been set. We're discussing the board's authority to establish community use of amenities and the inappropriate legal threats." "I believe we need to vote to approve the agenda," called out an elderly man from the back. "And I'd like to propose an amendment to include discussion of the scope of board powers under the bylaws." "Seconded," called several voices at once. Diane's face flushed with anger, but she was too experienced to lose control publicly. "Fine. All in favor of the amended agenda?" Nearly every hand in the room went up. Emma felt a surge of hope. What followed was unlike any HOA meeting in Sycamore Hills history. For nearly an hour, residents questioned Diane and the board about their interpretation of Section 8, Paragraph 12. Several longtime homeowners pointed out that the provision had been added specifically to address holiday decorations after a dispute about an elaborate Christmas display years ago. Jennifer, looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke up. "I've reviewed our legal position with my brother-in-law who practices real estate law. He advises that our interpretation of the bylaw is likely indefensible in court." Diane shot her a look of pure venom. "That's your personal opinion, Jennifer." "Actually," said a man Emma didn't recognize, standing up from the middle of the room, "it's mine as well. I'm David Chen, Rachel Chen's law partner. Several of your neighbors contacted our firm today with concerns about HOA overreach. I'm here as a homeowner resource." He held up a folder. The police arrived quickly, 2 officers in a patrol car with flashing lights that soon drew curious neighbors from their homes. Emma stood on her sidewalk, answering questions and watching as one officer took photos of the vandalism while the other knocked on nearby doors to ask if anyone had seen anything suspicious. "Do you have any idea who might have done this, ma'am?" asked Officer Rivera, a young woman with keen eyes who seemed to miss nothing as she surveyed the damage. Emma hesitated only briefly. "There's been a dispute with my HOA president, Diane Holloway. We just came from a meeting where things didn't go her way." The officer nodded, making notes. "We'll need details about that. Any witnesses to previous confrontations?" "Several," Emma replied, thinking of the neighbors who had watched Diane demand access to her pool. "And the meeting tonight was recorded." As they spoke, Mark jogged up the street, followed closely by Eleanor and several other neighbors who had left the meeting right after Emma. "We saw the police car," Mark explained, his expression darkening as he took in the vandalism. "This is unbelievable." Eleanor gasped at the spray-painted message. "This has Diane written all over it. She did this." Officer Rivera raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am. Do you have evidence?" Before Eleanor could respond, another car pulled up, Jennifer, accompanied by the other board members, minus Diane. They approached with expressions of shock and concern. "We came to check if you were okay after the meeting," Jennifer explained to Emma. "I tried calling, but..." Her voice trailed off as she saw the destroyed garden and the red letters on the door. "Oh my God." Emma's phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Neighbors called. Coming over with David. Do not clean anything until we document everything." Within 30 minutes, Emma's front yard had become an impromptu neighborhood gathering. The police continued their investigation, interviewing neighbors and taking statements. Rachel and David arrived, accompanied by a professional photographer who meticulously documented the damage from every angle. "This is textbook harassment and vandalism," Rachel told Emma quietly. "If we can prove who did this, we'll add it to our case." As the night wore on, something unexpected began to happen. Neighbors Emma barely knew offered to help clean up once the police finished. Jennifer and the board members huddled in serious conversation, occasionally glancing toward Emma with determined expressions. There was a sense of community forming, ironically exactly what Diane had claimed to want, but genuine rather than forced. Around midnight, after the police had finished their initial investigation and most neighbors had gone home, Emma sat exhausted on her porch steps. Mark and Eleanor had insisted on staying to help remove the worst of the spray paint, and Jennifer had promised to return in the morning with replacement plants from her own garden. "You should stay with me tonight," Eleanor offered. "You can see your house from my guest room. If anyone comes back, we'll know." Emma was about to accept when Officer Rivera returned from speaking with her partner. "Ms. Richardson, we've just received some interesting information," she said. "A neighbor 2 doors down has security cameras that cover part of your street. They provided footage showing a vehicle matching Ms. Holloway's car parked near your home around 8:30 p.m. during the HOA meeting. The driver, who appears to be wearing a hooded jacket, exits with something in their hands and approaches your property, then returns to the vehicle about 10 minutes later." Emma felt a cold satisfaction. That was definitely during the meeting. Diane left early, about 8:15. "We'll be paying Ms. Holloway a visit tonight," Officer Rivers said. "In the meantime, I recommend you stay elsewhere as suggested." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Emma had barely slept in Eleanor's guest room, watching her own house across the street and jumping at every sound. When her phone rang at 7 a.m., she answered immediately. "Emma, it's Jennifer. I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I was up," Emma assured her. "Any news?" "Yes." Jennifer's voice was tight with suppressed excitement. "The police arrested Diane last night. They found spray paint matching the color on your door in her garage and paint-stained gloves in her trash. And apparently her car's GPS history shows she drove to your house during the meeting." Emma sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "They arrested her?" "For vandalism and criminal harassment, from what I understand. The police searched her home and found, well, evidence that this wasn't an isolated incident. She had files on several homeowners, including you. Detailed notes about daily routines, perceived rule violations, personal information. It's disturbing." 3 months later, on a perfect late September afternoon, Emma stood by her pool watching as children splashed in the shallow end, while adults chatted in small groups around her backyard. Music played softly from speakers and the smell of grilling burgers filled the air. Mark manned the barbecue, wearing an apron that read "Neighborhood Grill Master," while Eleanor organized a cooler full of drinks. This was Emma's 3rd pool party of the summer, each one a deliberate personal choice to invite neighbors who had become friends. What had begun as a nightmare confrontation had evolved into something unexpected, real connections with the people around her. "More lemonade," Jennifer approached, pitcher in hand. "Thanks." Emma held out her glass. "How was the court hearing yesterday?" Jennifer's expression turned serious. "About what we expected. Diane pled guilty to criminal mischief and harassment as part of a plea deal. No jail time, but she got probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The restraining orders stay in place." Emma nodded, unsurprised. After Diane's arrest, more neighbors had come forward with stories and evidence of her vindictive behavior. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court had revealed what many suspected. Beneath Diane's controlling exterior was a deeply insecure person who had used her HOA position to feel powerful. "She's selling her house," Jennifer added. "Listed it yesterday. I guess facing everyone in the neighborhood was too much after everything came to light." "Can't say I'm sorry to hear that," Emma admitted. "Though I almost wish her well." "Almost." Jennifer smiled. "You're a better person than most would be in your position." They looked over as a burst of laughter came from the far side of the yard, where David Chen was telling a story to a group of neighbors. Rachel sat beside him, clearly enjoying whatever tale he was spinning. "Your attorneys seem to be hitting it off," Jennifer observed. "They do," Emma agreed with a smile. "Rachel's been joining us for Friday night drinks since the court case started. Turns out she lives only a few miles away in Oakwood Heights. The irony isn't lost on me," Jennifer mused. Diane wanted to force community, and instead her actions led to genuine friendships forming naturally. Emma's phone buzzed, a news alert. She glanced down and let out a short laugh. "What is it?" Jennifer asked. "The state legislature just passed that bill they've been debating, the one inspired by our case. It officially limits HOA powers regarding private property usage and requires documented homeowner consent for any community use of private amenities." Emma shook her head in wonder. "They're calling it the Sycamore Rule." Jennifer raised her glass. "To unintended consequences and boundaries," Emma added, clinking her glass against Jennifer's. As the afternoon progressed, Emma found herself sitting at the edge of her pool, feet dangling in the water, watching the gathering with a sense of contentment. These past months had transformed Sycamore Hills. Under Jennifer's leadership, the HOA had become what should have been all along, a facilitator rather than a dictator. The renovation of the community center's wading pool had been completed last month, funded by a voluntary neighborhood fundraiser that had exceeded its goal within days. The small children's pool was nothing compared to Emma's, but it served its purpose for community swim lessons and gave families without pools a place to cool off. More importantly, the bylaws had been comprehensively revised with input from homeowners at every stage. The ambiguous language of Section 8, Paragraph 12 had been clarified to specifically exclude private backyard features, and a new transparency requirement ensured all board decisions were properly documented and communicated. "Penny for your thoughts," said Mark, sitting down beside her with a plate of food. "Just reflecting," Emma replied. "It's funny how things work out. 3 months ago, I was fighting to keep strangers out of my pool. Now I'm voluntarily hosting pool parties. But on your terms," Mark pointed out. "That's the difference." Emma nodded. "Exactly. My choice, my invitation, my rules." Eleanor joined them, sitting on Emma's other side. "Have you seen the community newsletter? The last page has the most interesting piece." She handed Emma a folded paper. The back page featured an article titled "Private Property Rights versus Community Benefits: Finding Balance in HOAs." The byline read, "Jennifer Alvarez, Interim President." "She's been researching HOA best practices across the country," Eleanor explained. "There's talk of her presenting at a national HOA conference next spring." Emma scanned the article, impressed by its thoughtful approach to balancing individual rights with community needs. "She's good at this. Much better than Diane ever was."